In addition to Rwanda, Botswana was also approached by the government in London for an asylum pact, but declined. They say they have enough problems of their own, at least the foreign minister says that. And despite Rwanda, they are not willing to do that, although the British were considering them as a host country for migrants who have entered the UK irregularly. And the kingdom approached the country through diplomatic channels with a request, but was rejected. And we know that Botswana's foreign minister Lemogang Kwape confirmed that in an interview with the South African news channel Newsroom Africa. Kwape did not say when Britain turned to Botswana. But just this week, after weeks of debate, the British House of Lords paved the way for deportations to Rwanda, last week. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak would like to have the first migrants who entered the country irregularly brought to the East African country in 10 to 12 weeks, regardless of their origin. People should submit their asylum applications there and stay there if they are approved. And there was legal wrangling over the controversial project, and human rights groups, heavily criticized the plans. And Botswana's foreign minister Kwape said in response to the rejection of the British request that his country already had enough problems to deal with, particularly migration problems in their neighborhood. And therefore he believes that accepting undesirable migrants from another country while we are dealing with our own problems in the region would be unfair to Botswana. London concluded the controversial asylum pact with the leadership in Kigali in 2022, and according to British media reports, after the deal with Rwanda, the kingdom also held talks with 4 other countries for this purpose. That was Armenia, Costa Rica, Ivory Coast, and Botswana. In the future, all refugees who arrive on the island without the necessary documents will be flown to Rwanda now. Only there they are allowed to apply for asylum, and if successful, they will then be allowed to stay in the African country, but there are no plans to return them to Great Britain. What Sunak claims as a success is actually a procedure that is not practical, but is inhumane. Nevertheless, some politicians here in Germany have already publicly expressed their sympathy for a similar practice. Everyone who applies for asylum in Europe should be transferred to a safe third country and go through a procedure there. If the outcome is positive, the safe third country will grant the applicant protection on site. That was a draft by by the Conservative Party, but it's a draft. And the Liberals and others are also open. And the right-wingers here have proposed applying the Rwanda model completely throughout the EU. But it would be a fatal mistake for Germany from a humanitarian, legal and financial point of view. In principle, various experts believe it is possible to outsource asylum procedures to safe third countries. However, Rwanda, for example, is not suitable for this. Freedom of expression and the opposition's options for action are severely restricted there. The elections do not meet democratic standards, and political opponents are repeatedly wrongly imprisoned. This is not only what NGOs write, but also the German Ministry for Economic Development and Cooperation. The minister comes from my home country, but not from my party though, my hometown. At the same time, the British government will probably have to prepare for new waves of lawsuits in the future, despite the law. The Supreme Court in Great Britain initially ruled that the project violated British and international law. However, the British government is overcoming this with a trick. Rwanda was quickly declared a safe third country by law, even though the court had previously decided that it was exactly not that. And 2 years ago, the European Court of Human Rights stopped the planned Rwanda flight at the last minute. It is quite possible that the court will continue to make this decision in the future. However, Sunak has already announced that he wants to ignore this if necessary. Incidentally, this is not enough for the hardliners within Sunak's Conservatives. They would like to repeal British human rights laws, the European Convention on Human Rights, the Geneva Refugee Convention, and a number of other agreements, terminating contracts that already worked wonderfully with Brexit. But are the Rwanda flights perhaps ultimately cheaper than the previous method? Well, there are big doubts about that too. Not a single flight has taken off yet. Nevertheless, the project is said to have already cost £500 million. And the costs are estimated at several £100,000 per refugee. Just as a comparison, Federal Chancellor Olaf Scholz agreed with the Prime Minister last year that the federal government would in future pay a flat rate of €7,500 per asylum seeker per year. Our Prime Minister, not that one. All of the objections mentioned should be reason enough for Germany not to follow Great Britain's example. However, I haven't told you the best counter-argument yet. The reception capacity in Rwanda is currently only designed to accommodate a few hundred refugees per year. And this year alone, 4,600 people came to the island by boat by March. And Sunak had repeatedly said that the measure was intended to serve as a deterrent for refugees not to make the journey to Great Britain in the first place. But how is that supposed to work when everyone knows that only a fraction of those arriving will actually end up in Rwanda? The Chancellor did not address the issue directly when he and the British Prime Ministers appeared before the press last week here in Berlin, but some of the formulations gave a deep insight. We would continue to work with Great Britain on migration issues, but while respecting fundamental rights and international law. That's what Scholz told the Capital's press. The statements were clearly aimed at the Rwanda model, and in addition, the Chancellor continued to advocate for legal migration routes, because that's what we would need so that economic growth and economic prosperity can continue to be guaranteed in the future, as Scholz said. And Scholz made it clear that in his view, the British had miscalculated with Brexit. When Scholz was then asked directly whether the Rwanda model was also an option for Germany, he evaded the question. Last year, the most far-reaching measures to control migration in the last 20 to 30 years were adopted already. The Chancellor also referred to the EU's most recent asylum reform. It was the second verbal slap in the face to Brexit supporter Sunak. But the federal government probably doesn't think the model is completely absurd. The Federal Interior Minister Nancy Faeser from the Social Democrats is currently having a third country regulation examined by various experts. The first results should be available in June. And by the way, Great Britain has already considered other countries for new deals, as I said, but I think Armenia, Costa Rica and Ivory Coast might react like Botswana. But so far, Sunak's plans at least don't bring more seats in Parliament right now. The British Member of Parliament, Dan Poulter, has defected from the ruling Conservative Party to the opposition Labour Party, in another blow to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak ahead of a set of local elections that could put further pressure on his leadership. Sunak's Conservatives are trailing Labour by around 20 points in opinion polls ahead of a general election expected this year, and the timing of the defection appeared designed to damage the government further ahead of the local votes. Poulter said the government's record on the state-run National Health Service, the NHS, one of Sunak's 5 priorities for the country, meant he could no longer represent the Conservatives. It is abundantly clear to me that the Labour Party alone has the will and the trust to restore and reform the NHS. That's why we need a Labour government, is what Poulter said in an article in the Observer newspaper, adding he would stand down at the coming election. Labour leader Keir Starmer said it was fantastic to welcome Poulter to the party. And he said across the country more and more people are switching to Labour because they know only this changed Labour Party can deliver the change Britain needs, is what he said in a statement. Poulter is the second Conservative lawmaker to defect to Labour since the last election, after Christian Wakeford switched in 2022 over former Prime Minister Boris Johnson's conduct around rule breaking and his parties during the COVID-19 lockdowns. Sunak has faced a tough time trying to recover because the Conservatives' fortunes after the premierships of Johnson and Liz Truss tanked the party's poll ratings and has blamed strike actions by doctors and other health workers for throwing his pledge to cut hospital waiting lists off track. But Poulter said the government had put ideology ahead of pragmatism in dealing with the industrial disputes, leaving patients to bear the brunt. A spokesperson for the Conservatives said Poulter's defection would be disappointing news for his constituents, adding the government has increased funding for the NHS. What Dent says is wrong, as Sir Keir Starmer has no plan for our NHS, the spokesperson said. Well, when you see this video, the local elections should have happened already. At least I'm planning my schedule like this. But of course, I'm filming it a bit earlier, so I don't know the results yet. But you'll definitely get a comment on those in another video. And if you want to see another video right now, the next one is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.